By early winter of 1896, in a side wing of the Imperial Academy of Sciences in St. Petersburg, a junior archivist opened a crate that should not have existed. The catalogue card, typed in uneven Cyrillic, read "broken bronze, to be melted." Inside, wrapped in mildew-stained linen, lay a single photographic plate, a bell suspended in mid-air, hung not from a beam, but from a lattice of copper coils and polished brass. The caption below the emulsion had been scraped away and overwritten, "Kazan Cathedral Bell, Recast 1884, yet an ink note, half erased, still clung to the margin. First Resonance Trials, 1873. Official reports described routine recasting, nothing more than an upgrade in tone, but the image showed something else: wires, instruments, and a faint halo of light around the rim, as if the metal were already singing. Dust floated in the shaft of grey window light. On the far wall, a blueprint of the same bell, with an earlier date, hung skewed, its lower half deliberately torn away. History remembers progress, but forgets what it replaced. By late June of 1873, the air above Vienna's Prater grounds trembled with machinery and voices. The World's Fair catalogue lists on page 412 a grand bronze bell, 3.4 meters in diameter, cast for demonstration purposes by a Russo-Asian consortium. No company name, no Foundry mark. The bell appears in one surviving photograph, its smooth flanks glinting under a glass roof, surrounded by men in frock coats. The caption claims the plate was taken summer 1873, yet the same photograph reappears in a regional almanac dated 1871. The shadows fall at the same angle. The crack in the paving stones is identical. A visitor's diary from the August offers the first human trace. They rang it once at noon. The tone did not fade. It hung in the air. My chest vibrated as if I were hollow. Officials described it as a marvel of metallurgy, nothing more. Yet restoration notes made a century later mention hairline grooves inside the bell's lip, etched in precise intervals, like an unwritten scale. Outside the pavilion it was hot, the metallic smell of rails and boiler smoke clinging to the air. Inside, the bell's tone, captured in no document, must have slipped into the iron ribs of the roof. Today, a derelict exhibition hall in Vienna still bears unexplained stress fractures along its rafters, spaced at regular distances. Engineers call them fatigue artifacts. Acousticians quietly call them frozen frequencies. The record shows a temporary exhibit. The photograph shows a bell built to outlast the building that housed it. In the damp spring of 1875, near the confluence of the Oka and Volga rivers, the Nizhny Novgorod Foundry logs recorded a routine commission. Recasting of obsolete monastery bell per diocesan order. The bell's origin is listed as a Tartar cloister, foundation date unknown. Tartar is crossed out once and rewritten as Tartarian in a different hand. The foundry floor plan, preserved in a rolled blueprint, shows a curious addition: 4 shallow pits surrounding the casting pit, lined with brick and marked only with the letter R. No furnace records mention them. The blueprint is dated 1872, yet the official construction permit is stamped 1876. According to the diocesan archive, the old bell was cracked beyond repair. Yet a surviving sketch made by a young apprentice on scrap paper shows the original intact, with a band of unfamiliar markings around the waist. When it rang, the apprentice later wrote, the windows did not rattle, the stone did. On the day of the pour, heavy fog rolled in from the river, muffling the clang of hammers. Witnesses noted an odd stillness in the air, as if the usual echo of the yard had been swallowed. Modern metallurgists, studying a surviving fragment from that recast bell, report anomalously uniform grain, as if the bronze had already been melted and restructured many times before. The Foundry ledger lists the recast bell as delivered in 1877. A shipping invoice tucked between pages gives a different year, 1869. Recasting, the record says, rewriting, The metal suggests. By October of 1880, Manchester's new town hall was nearly complete. The clock tower rose above the smoky city, its neo-Gothic silhouette already dominating engravings in local newspapers. The bell, imported from the continent, was described as modern, efficient, and tuned to the key of E. Yet in a private report filed by an acoustical consultant, a rare profession for the time, another detail emerges. He notes that beneath the main bell, hidden within the timber frame, hung 4 smaller sealed bronze forms, never rung for the public. They do not chime, he writes, but they answer when the great bell sounds, vibrating with a frequency that is not in the score. The tower's interior blueprint, dated 1878, shows only the main bell. A revised blueprint from 1881 adds the 4 smaller forms, backdated in the margin, as if they had always been there. On the day of the first test ring, a cold rain swept across the city, turning the streets into reflecting channels. Workers reported a strange stillness in the moments after each strike, as if the roar of the city dropped away for a heartbeat. Today, visitors climbing the tower notice the same hairline cracks in the stone ribs that appear in towers across Europe. Identically spaced, as though drawn by an unseen compass, the installation date on the tower's commemorative plaque reads 1879. The bell's casting mark, barely visible under corrosion, suggests 1872. In the archive, it was labelled a routine installation. In the stone, a different timeline resonates. On a humid evening in May of 1883, in an office above the Golden Horn, an Ottoman draftsman inked the final lines of a drawing titled Resonant Towers for Harbour Signalling. The blueprint shows slender minaret-like structures around the inlet, each crowned not by a crescent, but by a concealed bronze bell within a perforated shell. The State Archive file that contains this drawing lists it as a never-built proposal, yet a photograph taken from a French steamer in 1884 shows, in the mist, a tower on the very spot the blueprint specifies. No such tower exists in later maps. The engineer's name on the blueprint has been scrubbed away with knife marks. Under angled light, archivists have traced the ghost of a signature, followed by a word that may be Tartari. A clerk's note in the margin reads, "We were told not to copy these plans." The air in the drawing room would have smelled of ink and sea salt, the distant clang of shipyard metal punctuating the quiet. Official histories describe the period as one of modernization. Telegraph lines, lighthouses, steam ferries. Bells are mentioned only as timekeepers and calls to prayer, yet the tower in the steamer's photograph shows a ring of narrow openings around its midsection, precisely where, in the blueprint, channels for directional sound beams are indicated. The photograph bears a studio stamp dated 1881. The steamer's logbook, found in a maritime museum, records the same voyage as 1885. In certain Istanbul neighbourhoods today, residents speak of places where sound travels oddly. Whispers heard clearly across crowded streets. Calls to prayer arriving with a half-second delay. The old bell towers are gone, but the acoustic footprint lingers. The blueprint was archived as a curiosity. The engineer's name was not. In the dry summer heat of 1887, Chicago's Board of Public Works commissioned preliminary designs for what would eventually become the world's Columbian Exposition. Among the many plans is a lesser-known proposal for a central acoustic tower intended officially as a grand clock and chime to regulate fair activities. The surviving blueprint, stored in a box mislabeled Sanitary Proposals, shows a lattice tower ringed with bronze bells at 3 levels, each connected by a network of conduits descending below ground. The legend notes, subterranean resonant channels to distributed kiosks. No corresponding excavation plans survive. A marginal note in a different ink reads simply, too reminiscent of Tartarian system. Replaced with electric telegraph. Yet a photograph attributed to late 1892 shows a partial steel frame in the fairgrounds, matching the tower's base dimensions. Official captions call it a temporary derrick. A labourer's brief letter home mentions working under the singing beams and how his tools buzzed when the wind struck the structure. By the time the fair opened in 1893, no such tower stood on the grounds. The official story credits disagreements over cost and aesthetics. The blueprint's title block is dated 1887, but the watermark in the paper belongs to a batch manufactured in 1881. On the present-day site, now a park and campus, acoustic engineers have recorded persistent low-frequency hums at night, uncorrelated with traffic or power lines. The pattern of standing waves maps eerily well onto the old tower footprint. The central acoustic tower exists in no guidebook. Its ghost may exist in the soil. By January of 1890, winter had locked a remote Siberian settlement in ice. In a mission station report filed to St. Petersburg, a single line stands out. New bell received from Kazan, tone unusually penetrating. The bell was installed in a modest wooden tower above an orphanage, far from any city. According to the mission ledger, the bell was rung only at dawn and dusk, yet neighbouring settlements up to 40 kilometres away reported hearing a clear metallic note on still days, as if in the next street. The crate that delivered the bell bore two conflicting stencils, cast 1889, and faintly beneath, refined 1873, Project R. No such project is mentioned elsewhere in the mission archive. A nun's diary, brittle with cold ink. Records. When father strikes it, the children grow quiet. Even the wind seems to listen. The tower was built without nails in its upper frame, only interlocking joints and iron straps, an oddity noted by a later restoration crew. The bell's yoke shows signs of having been mounted previously in a larger structure. A photograph taken around 1891 shows frost crystals forming in delicate patterns around the bell's lip, as if drawn into invisible nodes. The photograph's reverse is stamped 1886. Today, nothing remains of the orphanage. The site lies under a small hydroelectric reservoir. Field recordings taken nearby reveal intermittent tones in the water's turbulence clustered around the frequency once attributed to that bell. In the mission's final inventory, compiled in 1894, the bell is listed as removed for recasting. No destination is given. In the ledger, it was a line of ink. In the air, it was a radius of influence. On a rainy afternoon in October of 1891, in a basement room of the Paris Conservatory, an acoustics professor and his assistant arranged curious apparatus around a bronze segment labelled simply Echantillon B. The conservatory's logbook notes it had been donated by a Russian foundry, origin unspecified. They suspended the fragment by silk cords, surrounding it with tuning forks, a primitive resonator, and smoked glass plates dusted with fine sand. When the fragment was struck softly, not only did the nearby forks tremble, but the sand aligned into precise radial patterns, not circles, but spirals. The assistant's notebook reads, "The form responds not just to frequency, but to position in the room. When we move it closer to the wall, the pattern tightens." The experiment report, filed in 1892, concludes that the effect is likely due to unnoticed drafts. Yet someone later underlined that phrase in red ink and added, in the margin, "or unseen field." The fragment itself bears a casting date, 1873, same as the Vienna exhibition bell. The conservatory's acquisition record, however, lists 1886. In the dim, damp air, the room would have smelled of chalk and machine oil, the distant rumble of carriages filtering down as a muffled rhythm. Modern researchers, replaying the notes from that experiment, have compared the spiral sand patterns to contemporary visualizations of electromagnetic fields. The resemblance is unsettling. The fragment vanished from the conservatory inventory by 1895. Its last entry, reassigned to Industrial Museum. No such museum holds it today. In the archive, it was a sample. In the lab, it behaved like a key. By late August of 1893, the Columbian Exposition blazed with electric light. Official histories celebrate the White City as a triumph of illumination of Edison, Tesla, and Westinghouse. Hidden amid the machinery hall exhibits, however, a small entry in the fair's technical schedule, lists a demonstration in acoustic signalling by an unnamed foreign delegation. A single photograph, filed under miscellaneous exhibits, shows a darkened room with a bell-like object enclosed in a wooden frame, cables running from it to distant corners. Visitors sit in chairs, hands to their chest. The caption claims it is a vibration therapy device, dated 1893. The same image appears in a Russian journal in 1890, described as long-distance auditory relay. A journalist's unprinted notes discovered in his estate record no wires to the far end, yet the small chime in the annex sounded each time the bell in the frame was struck. The officials insisted the wire was hidden. I saw none. The demonstration vanished from subsequent fair programs. The room it occupied was relabeled as a medical exhibit. Outside, summer thunderstorms rolled in from the lake, thickening the air with ozone. Inside, the bell's low tone caused dust on the rafters to tremble, a soft rain of particles falling in time with each strike. Today, the grounds hold museums and a university campus. A physics building stands near where the demonstration room once was. Students complain of intermittent hums in its lecture halls, unexplained by HVAC or street noise, always clustered around the same frequency. The fair catalogues list thousands of marvels. One, it seems, was recast into silence. In a grey Berlin morning of 1894, an inventor named only as HM filed a patent submission for harmonic induction towers for the distribution of time and signal. The drawings show slender towers crowned by enclosed bells, each connected not by wires, but by lines of harmonic resonance described in dense technical German. The patent clerk's rejection note preserved in the margin cites insufficient demonstration of mechanism and too great similarity to foreign unacknowledged systems. A private annotation, not meant for file, reads, applicant references Tartarische Anlagen, unclear term. The inventor's accompanying notes claim that properly tuned bells, placed at specific distances and heights, could share not just time signals but structured vibrations carrying simple information, long before radio was publicly demonstrated. A fellow engineer later wrote in a letter, he spoke of cities once timed by towers alone, no wires, no gears. They rang the pattern into the air, he said. The patent office windows rattled with passing carriages. Inside, the ink dried quickly in the heated room, the crackle of coal stoves competing with the quiet scratching of pens. The drawings bear two dates, one in the title block, 1894, and another, smaller, near the bell diagrams, 1876. Modern telecommunication researchers who have glimpsed reproductions of these drawings note geometric relationships between tower locations identical to those used in present-day cellular networks. The spacing is too close to be coincidence. The file's final notation reads, "Return to applicant. No record of resubmission exists. The inventor's name vanishes from technical directories after 1896. In the ledger, it was an impossible claim. In the geometry, it was decades ahead. In the autumn of 1895, rain streaked the windows of an aging foundry in Riga as a small restoration team surveyed the premises for possible reuse. Their logbook notes unusual floor patterns in the main casting hall, a lattice of shallow channels in the brick filled long ago with slag and dust. Measurements reveal the channels form concentric rings and radiating lines, all centered on a circular pit just large enough for a substantial bell mold. A later note in the log reads, possible acoustic insulation or energy distribution. On one wall hangs a soot-blackened diagram of an enormous bell, annotated in a script mixed in Cyrillic and Latin characters. The casting date, 1873. The delivery destination, erased with a single vertical stroke. One restorer scribbles in his margin, when we walked over the centre, the whole hall seemed to answer. Floor vibrated, though no machinery ran. The air inside the abandoned hall would have been cold, smelling of rust, damp brick, and old ash. Every footstep echoed longer than expected, as if bouncing off surfaces no longer there. Inconsistent dates litter the restoration file. An inspection summary is typed as 1895. but the photographic plates glued beside it are stamped 1889. Satellite images of the site today, now an industrial park, show that the longest surviving building aligns almost perfectly with the regional geomagnetic lines. Of the channels cut into the floor, restoration notes conclude, possibly drainage. The team did not lift the slag to check. In the report, it was a curiosity. Under the debris, it may still be a diagram in brick. By March of 1896, thaw began along the Volga, and Kazan's riverfront filled once more with carts and smoke. In the shadow of its cathedral, workers prepared to lower an old bell from the tower, its surface darkened by decades of soot. A new bell, commissioned from Nizhny Novgorod, waited in the yard. The cathedral chapter's minutes describe the decision as aesthetic. The old tone is dull and of insufficient brightness, yet an internal memorandum, never meant for public view, notes complaints that the bell's sound carries beyond parish bounds, and that authorities prefer a more modest radius. A tower caretaker's notebook records the final ringing. They told me to sound it 12 times only. The city fell quiet. They say the barges on the river shivered. When the bell was finally lowered, workers discovered shallow incisions along its inner surface, fine grooves at regular intervals. A visiting engineer sketched them hurriedly, labelling each with frequency estimates. His notebook, found years later, bears 2 dates on the same page. The entry is headed 1896, yet the sketch itself is signed 1873. The new bell, cast in cleaner lines, lacked the grooves. During installation, lightning struck the tower in an otherwise clear sky, leaving a spider web of hairline cracks in the masonry, identical in spacing to those seen in Manchester and Vienna. Today, the replacement bell still rings. Acoustic measurements show a curious absence. Frequencies recorded in early wax cylinders from the tower, dated ambiguously between 1890 and 1900, include tones no longer present. The old bell's fragments were supposedly melted down. None have been traced. In the official chronicle, it was modernization. In the tower stone, the old pattern remains. On a cool autumn day in 1904, in a small museum in Krakow, a curator unpacked a crate marked assorted bronzes. Among shaped handles and broken candlesticks lay a peculiar object, a section of a bell's crown, severed cleanly, its surface etched with faint regular striations. The acquisitions ledger describes it casually. Bell fragment. Origin uncertain. Donated by travelling engineer. The initial label called it Church Bell Remnant, late 19th C. A pencil line through that label replaced it with folk casting, no significance. The fragment, when lightly struck, produced a tone that lingered unnaturally long in the small exhibition room. Visitors complained of a ringing in the ears afterward. In a private letter, the curator confides, "There is something unsettling in it. When I stay late, the room hums low, even when no one has touched it for hours." The museum's inventory card bears 2 conflicting dates of acquisition, 1898 and 1904. The donor's name is illegible, overwritten by a later hand. Decades later, when the collection was reorganized, the fragment was placed in storage. A modern audio technician testing historical spaces recorded a persistent, low hum in that storeroom, peaking at a frequency consistent with other surviving bells from the same era. The fragment's last catalogue note reads, "Moved to off-site storage, location unrecorded." In the showcase, it was a curiosity. In the dark, it may still be vibrating. In recent years, field recordists and urban explorers have begun to notice a pattern they cannot easily publish. Late-night recordings near old town halls, disused foundries, and forgotten bell towers from Vienna to Istanbul, Manchester to Kazan reveal a faint shared signature, a low-frequency hum clustered around a narrow band, recurring in cities whose bells were recast between 1873 and 1896. Digital spectrograms show identical structures in the background noise, as if the urban air still carried an imprint of long-vanished tones. One researcher, comparing these traces, realized that when mapped geographically, The strongest hums align along arcs that match, with uncanny precision, the proposed layouts from the Berlin patent. In an unpublished conference paper, she wrote, "We are not listening to bells. We are listening to what remains of the spaces they once tuned." On certain winter evenings, when fog wraps older districts in soft grey, pedestrians pause without knowing why, feeling a pressure in the chest as a distant bell strikes. The sound is ordinary, the resonance around it is not. In the archives, the term Tartarian survives only as a misprint, a crossed-out note, a whispered rumour in the margins of engineering reports. In metal and stone, its traces persist as stress fractures, hums, and voids where sound behaves strangely. The real, for now, runs out of frames.